we are very happy to be joined by the Vice President of PAN Trinbago, Keith Simpson, to talk about the evolution of PAN. How are you doing, Mr. Simpson?
I'm doing well as could be. We're all working hard this month, Steel Band Month.
Yes, so in terms of Steel Band Month, what are some of those things when we talk about Steel Band, times from Andre Tanker, even before that, what are some of those milestones along the journey that really stand out to you in terms of the evolution of PAN?
Well, 39 is a year that many people say, the elders, that PAN started. As far as back in 1937, it was reported in the Port of Spain Gazette that metal instruments were on the road, not in the form of PAN, but accompanying, singing netty netty and things like that. And in 1939, we had the Alexander's Ragtime Band from Chagrin in Port of Spain. And Alexander Ragtime Band was a movie which was licensed and shown in United States, Alexander's Ragtime Band in 1938. So having them call themselves after the movie, there's a lot of steel bands after, as you would know, Desperados, Renegades, Starlift, North Stars, use the name of movies. And and they would have had, the leader would have had a scissor steel coat on a top hat, and the members made bow ties out of cardboard, and then they had music sheets. And so there are so many stories as how like how the PAN really started, who invented it. And in an interview, Oscar Pyle says that, an old pioneer, and some says that no one person invented the PAN, because we're not taken away from Winston Spree, Simon, and other pioneers. I mean, Tokyo people and the elders will tell you it's Winston Spree. But steel band was not invented in a laboratory setting, like the telephone or the radio or the cell, and so that we could pinpoint. And you have to remember back in the 30s, 39, early 40s, that the upper class, in the newspapers, also frowned on the steel band. It was a nuisance. We got a little fight and thing, and they used to come out on the road, and the police would bring the van, what you call the Black Maria, or the black van, and pelt the PAN and the players inside of the van, and take them down. So that's it. And then, so that is how it progressed. They were beating technically the PANs. And when the first PAN with instrument, with song then, was 4 notes, and it wasn't concave, it was 4 bombs, convex. And Ellie Manlett is accredited of sinking and using the big drum, 40 or 45 gallon drum. But then they use the small paintings, they use the biscuiting and chemical drums, and so. And they were hitting it. And I would presume that if you keep hitting, and they were not playing it with, they were not rubber and the sticks. They said, Ellie Manlett, he got the credit for putting rubber on sticks. And so if it sink, then you turn it and you pong it from inside and you try to bring it back out. And somewhere along the line, they would have found that they had a tone, So it was 4 bombs. That is how it's done, And that's speaking to an old PAN pioneer, and he said, well, we used to tune a PAN, not tune, if you know a tune, you try to tune PAN to the tune, that's how they used to do it. But other than that is 4 bombs, and they would play Merry Little Dance. Simple thing, we would need 3 or 4 notes. A guy called Victor Toti Wilson is also credited of. They say he used to tune the PAN to the Queen's Royal College clock. Pim, boom, pim, boom. So you have a lot of stories in the PAN. So that during the war, well, obviously the First World War, was from 1939 to 1945. There was no carnival during that time. 1939 would have been the last carnival, and after that was the World War. And it was a time of hardships and so. And the panmen would have had time to experiment. And another time, well, obviously, so come out and you go with police chase them. Those from East Port of Spain would have been in the dry river experimenting. So by the time the war was over in 1945, and you had VJ there, pan came out the road, which was then we could consider melodic pan. Because by that time, Ellie Manet would have been involved with the things, you know.
And you see how you're saying these things, Mr. Simpson. I think it's so important that we're able to have these stories, to have these accounts. Because sometimes when you have one person having a louder voice than everybody,
yeah,
the story can kind of skew towards them. I see you shaking your head like you're preaching to the
convention. Well, let me tell you, everybody have a story. Because remember, we had Tongue, we had St. James, we had the West, the Invaders, and all these bands. With their own stories. You have Neville Junes by Old Stars. You have Winston Street by Tokyo, right? So you have different pioneers, Ellie Manet and his brother Vernon Manet, and the elder one, Joseph Manet. So you would have had many pioneers. I remember seeing an interview with an elderly guy from Point Forte, and he said pan started in Point Forte because down there was the oil, and they had the drums down there. So everybody could give you a different story. You know, the books I would have read by Stemple and Fido Blake, and in many interviews, I try to archive it, but you get different stories. So I am a young anything, right? When I was born in 1950, pan was around 11 years. But I was happy that my grandmother took me to Carnival from when I was 3, 4, 5 years, and I was able to witness, listen to some of the older fellas in St. James. And in 1956, I grew opposite to Tripoli. And I hear pan in my head every night. I was very happy. In 1956. And St. James had many bands. You had North Stars, Valley Harps, Blue Stars, Symphonet, Crossroad, Crossfire, all these bands, Pan Am North Stars, BWI Sunjets, then you had Tripolians, then you had, many bands that came out of St. James, and then you had Woodbrook with Starlift, and had bands before that, Green Eyes and Saigon and all these bands, and they had Invaders, and then in Newtown you had Silver Stars, the first band to win Banner here.
And it's like when you're talking this, Mr. Simpson, we're going to continue the conversation momentarily. And
Sure.
When we return, I want to get to speaking to, I think, youth in Pan, because you're looking at signposts along the history. And when we return, I think we want to look forward a little bit.
Sure.
But, of course, we need to look backward to be able to see where it is we're going. Because the house had to build on the foundation. So we do that when we return. We're speaking with the Vice President of Pan Trinbago, Keith Simpson. Stay with us. We return with more. Welcome back. We are going in depth on Pan, the evolution of Pan. We're doing so with the Vice President of Pan Trinbago, Keith Simpson. And I'm grateful that you're able to give us this kind of context. And I really appreciate the fact that you said that Pan is something that is inclusive in a manner that sometimes we don't necessarily allow it to be. But at the same time, we're building on the work of others. And sometimes you just see something, you might even remember that you see it, but it just resonates with your spirit for you to try this way or to do it a little different, and then you're moving forward. But one of the things, as opposed to just looking at the evolution in how the instruments themselves were tuned, what kind of differences do you see in persons playing Pan, Mr. Simpson?
I just want to make mention of one thing, that the Pan is the first time that we had recycling. And people must remember that. We recycle the oil drum, the paint, the biscuit drum, and so, right? So what we're going to speak now about youth, I said, and I'll talk about the youth because a lot of those fellows who were in Pan in the early days were young. They were not in their 50s or 40s or so. So we had young people involved with Pan. But in growing up, many parents didn't allow the children to be the youth. I know about that. We know about that. Other of us know about that. And with good reason, that little upheavals and so. But those who were allowed to play, and there's a lot of them around, and some ran away and played pan, and a few who were allowed. But now, in present day, I will say, present day, you would note, well, around 76, we started schools panorama. So that would have started something. St. Francois College girls won the first panorama, right? And it would have meant then that you have more youths in 1976 coming into panorama and so on. Those who play with the schools will also play with other bands. What is happening now? We have a lot of youths going to UTT and then doing research in pan. They are getting the degree in pan and arranging and so on. So we have many, many talented youths, out there. Many, 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 many youths. And now you're free to play as you want.
And this is one of the things that I wanted to talk about because sometimes it feels as though you just intimated, you just spoke to it a little bit. There was a certain kind of energy. So parents didn't necessarily want the children involved. They didn't want the good children playing pan. And so it's almost as though you had to have this sort of rebellious nature, whether or not you're doing it overtly, saying you're going and play pan, or you're hiding to go and run and play pan.
Well, sure. Good. I remember one of the older pioneers. His name is Ernest Ferrer. He's 92 years old. He's one of the older pioneers still alive, right? He lives in Diego Martin. And he will tell you he used to hide the pan under the house and play the pan with turkey feathers until the father tell him, right, bring the pan out and play. He got everything from somebody from All Stars also. So that is one example of that guy. He was the founder of Dixieland Steel Orchestra, hiding to play the pan. I myself, I hide the sticks under the house home there. And, I was found out. When they thought I was studying in the kitchen, I was quite hungry with my West Side Symphony.
And I think it's really important because
I
don't, sometimes it can feel as though there's a bit of a disconnect. So people think, well, is this there? You can play it in school, you can play it in church, you can play it around the place, as opposed to saying, well, these are hard-fought gains. And even moving forward, looking at how the fact that there are individuals going to UTT, but learning arranging, but what are some of the other things that Pan Trinbago, I guess, would be pushing for? So I remember having one conversation, people talking about metallurgy. So is it that you need to keep on saying, okay, well, we're going to use drums from this source to make pans, or you're going to actually say, well, this is something that we're going in specifically for pan?
We have, pans made of a certain grade, gauge. We have revived a drum factory, right? And you're trying to make it profitable. And we are doing the normal size pan, and we are doing the G-pan. So we have people here who are very, very, one guy who's overseeing the factory there, and he's well qualified and so. So we can produce, we import the steel, and, but the staff in there's about 5 people, right? But we are producing pans. There are drums, in fact. We don't produce pans, we produce drums. But there's scope for people to learn, and because it is a skill in producing drums. There's a skill.
And with that, and harking back to the same sort of inclusive sort of energy where different places would do things a little differently. Do you think it's a matter of streamlining? Do you think it's a matter of, I like the pans from there because they have a kind of sweetness, especially around this area of the pan, or the way that I'm able to move? And how does the G-pan factor into that as well, in terms of
Well,
having more people use it?
the first thing is that we don't have many factories in Trinidad which produce drums, which is important. There was a time when I remember when Mr. Arnold was president, they imported drums from Chicago. They imported drums from Venezuela, right? They did. I know there's a drum factory which is open the next few days in Diego Martin. So at least we will have two factories being able to supply drums. We have many tuners. We are not short of tuners at all. We could export tuners. There are many tuners all over the Caribbean, some in the States, Canada. But as I said, we only have two drum factories. The G-pan, yes, produced by Brian Copeland, is an experiment, action by late Prime Minister Patrick Manning. And we had Muti Marshall and among others, Anthony Williams, another tuner involved with it. It was a secret thing because nobody knew what was happening. And it was reducing the amount of different pans and the sound. It's a bigger pan, so you could have a bigger range of notes, you know, and it's a heavier, to me, a heavier metal. It's much heavier. To me, the bass pan is very good, you know. So, but it hasn't caught on really. Some bands, you know, I know Skiffle, I know Face too, you know, they use some of the G pans, but obviously it will carry a heavier song and a wider range of notes on. So, but Tony Williams in 1960, I must mention, was bold and brave enough to take sheet metal and put it on a rim. And he did a similar type pan in 1968. Was destroyed in the Princess Building fire.
These are the things, these are the reasons we need to have these conversations. And we're very grateful that we were able to have this conversation with you, Mr. Simpson.
Yeah.
VP of Pan Trinbago, talking about the evolution of Pan, and hopefully we're able to have more and conversations that are also outside of August, helping us go forward in the way that we should. And on behalf of the entire news team at TTT, I'm Dike Rostant. This has been In Depth. Thank you so much for joining us.